All right, everybody, welcome back to the #1 television program in the history of the entire universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown, all three books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I'm going to be reviewing one of my favorite stories of all time, one of my favorite books of all time, and, there's a miniseries that was made about the book. There was a movie that was made about the book. We're going to be talking about all three in depth. This is going to be one of my longer reviews, so just bear with me. But it's going to be fascinating. This is one of the greatest spy thriller novels ever written, and it is John Le Carre's Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. This is part of the George Smiley spy thriller mystery series that John Le Carre wrote. There's probably about 6 or 7 books in the series. This is probably one of the middle books. I think it's one of the middle books. It is one of the middle books. I've already reviewed, I think, 2 of them so far. I've got the entire John Le Carre book collection over here. We'll just hurry and pan through the library real quick here, and I'll show you. Those are all my John Le Carre books. All of them thrillers, all of them spycraft thrillers. And his main character that was in a lot of his books was George Smiley. So let's talk about the book first a little bit, then we'll get into the comparisons between the movie and the miniseries. So I just read this. I watched the movie. The movie Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. It's right here. Now this is the movie. It's about 2.5 hours long. It stars, it's got an all-star cast. Colin Firth, Tom Hardy, John Hurt, Toby Jones, Mark Strong, Benedict Cumberbatch, and Gary Oldman. Just a great cast of characters. That is the movie. The miniseries stars Alec Guinness. This one came out in, I think, the late 70s or early 80s. It is a magnificent miniseries, by the way. And I'm going to talk about some of the details with those in a minute. So let's talk about the book itself. The a Le Carre book. This is the book that solidified Le Carre. I mean, he was known for his Cold War spy thrillers. And then this is the book that sort of solidified him as just like a mega superstar. I mean, it came out in 1974. The way Le Carre writes, it's just different than in other spy thrillers. I mean, John Le Carre was a spy himself, so he draws upon his own real-world experience as a real spy, and we get actual real spycraft in here, which isn't James Bond, over-the-top action. It's not Robert Ludlum, Jason Bourne over-the-top action. It's not fancy gadgets and narrow escapes and gunfights and explosions. Real spycraft in a John Le Carre book is the nuts and bolts of just everyday work, pushing papers around, listening to phone calls, tailing somebody through the city, things like this. And there's no high tech. I mean, this is set in the 70s, so there's no, if they have to go sneak around and find some information, they got to sneak into a building, make sure they don't get caught, go through people's filing cabinets. Nowadays it's just you get on the computer and you get a hacker to suss out all of your information. Back then, this was real spycraft where you had to tap phone lines, listen to phones, follow people down the street, sneaking into buildings. I mean, it was real stuff. And you had real people doing it just like you and me. We weren't like Jason Bourne. We weren't, trained MMA fighting assassins. We were just fat dudes like me in the British Secret Service. And that's what John Le Carre wrote about. That's what he talked about. You think, well, that's going to be boring as fuck all. But it's not. It's actually really intriguing to see how the real world spycraft works without all the explosions and fancy gadgets. And you do get some action in here. You do get some assassinations and things. But this is, as far as this book is concerned, John Le Carre doesn't feed you the answers. It's not a laid out plot where you're gonna suss out all the red herrings and it's gonna be all tied up for you in a bow at the end. No, the John Le Carre really makes you earn the ending. You have to figure out the ending yourself. It's not given to you. You got to figure it out. You got to pay attention to what you're reading. You got to pay attention to every little detail that is spoken in dialogue to catch the hints of what's going on, because this is all about a bad secret agent infiltrating the British Secret Service, and they got to figure out who it is. In fact, I just read from the introduction. This is exactly what John Le Carre was writing in this. We'll get to the comparisons between the novel and the movie and the miniseries in a minute. But John Le Carre, this is from his own words. He wanted to write a book that was about the infiltration of the British Secret Service, namely the inside-out logic of a double agent operation, and the sheer scale of the mayhem that can be visited on an enemy service when its intelligence gathering efforts fall under the control of its opponent. For while on one side the secret traitor will be doing his damnedest to frustrate the efforts of his own service, on the other he will be building himself a successful career in the service of the enemy, providing it with the coup and grace notes that it needs to justify its existence, and generally passing himself off as a capable and trustworthy fellow, a good man to have around on a dark night. And that's what this book is about. This is what the story is about. It's what the media is about. It's about, there's a mole in the British Secret Service. And we come to find out the term mole, this was the first time in the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. This is really the first time that term was kind of coined in intelligence, is like a mole. There's a mole. John Le Carre came up with that, as far as I can tell. He did. I did some Google. It seems like it was John Le Carre came up with this in this month. There's a mole. The British Secret Service knows there's a mole in their group of people, and we've got to suss it out. We got to figure it out. And this is where the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy stuff comes in. Let's talk about, so the movie, here's the thing. I just watched the movie, the miniseries, read the book, got so excited about all of them that I started reading the next book in the series, The Honorable Schoolboy. That's why I've got this up here. It's just sitting here for that reason. But anyway, so you get three different, the stories are the same, but they're told in three different ways. The book tells it in one way, the movie tells it in another way, and the mini-series tells it in a third way. The thing that's great about this is having three different versions of the story. And when I say tell in a different way, the book sort of bounces between, well, they all sort of bounce back and forth in time and place, and each one of them rearranges scenes differently. Like each one of them starts with a different scene in the book. Each one of them kind of goes about the pacing a little different. Of course, the pacing in this one is pretty brisk because it's 2.5 hours long. Actually, I think it's only 2 hours and 15 minutes long. How long is this? Something like 2 hours and 7 minutes. I was so fucking wrong about it. Okay, anyway. This is pretty crisp pacing. So they're cutting a lot of things out, but you get a lot of the story, and it's just a dynamite movie. Wonderfully filmed. The cinematography in this and the atmosphere created by the movie makers and the director is just, you feel like you are in a claustrophobic world of spies in this book. It's just, and then in the mini-series, the thing that's great about the mini-series is it's got, it goes into a lot more detail like the book does. I mean, it's just if you want to get this, it's just so well done. For something from the 1970s, this is really a well done thing. And the thing I like about this is, it's in this packaging, they've got this sort of glossary, this list of terms, where all the characters are so you can follow along. When I was reading the book, every time I read the book, which I've read it now 5 or 6 times, I put this in the book so I can always refer to the character list and who they are and what they're doing and what part of the story that's important to them, and it's just really cool to have all three versions of this story. It's the same story, just told in 3 different ways. So what you get is a magnificent spy tale told in 3 different ways with the movie. And you get what I'm saying, right? Each one of them is brilliant in its own way. So, yeah, so let's boil down the plot, because we haven't really talked about anything about the story itself yet. We've just kind of given vague sort of what this British spycraft. So we're dealing with the circus. Now, the circus is the nickname for the British Secret Service that John Le Carre uses in this book. There is a person named Control. He's just named Control. He is the head of the the Control is the former head of the Secret Service of the circus, and now he is going to be replaced. But we've got a situation where Control tells one of the Secret Service guys under him named Jim Preto that there's a mole. There's a mole in our group. And then the group is pretty small. It's only about 10 or some odd people that would be in this group of suspects who is the mole, working for the Russians, working under Carla. Carla is the nickname that they've given, the code name that they've given to Moscow's most powerful spy and assassin, for that matter. So someone's working for Carla, and he's infiltrated our group. He's a mole. We need to suss him out. And Jim Preto, once you suss this guy out, all you need to do is don't give me the name of him, don't give me who it is. We're just going to use that old rhyme, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. We're gonna name each of the guys. So Percy Alaline, one of their spies, he gets codenamed Tinker. Roy Bland, one of the other spies, gets codenamed Soldier. Toby Esterhouse gets codenamed Poor Man. Bill Hayden gets codenamed Taylor. And George Smiley gets codenamed Beggar Man. So those are the 5 suspects that we've got, the 5 possible moles. And once Jim Preto figures out who it is, he calls Control, just gives him, hey, it's Tinker, hey, it's Beggar Man, hey, it's... That's all we need. That's kind of the setup of the whole story. And it's really brilliant because you learn everything about British spycraft and like different things like the character Merlin and the witchcraft. Merlin is kind of sussing out them things, and everything that he does falls under the codename witchcraft. We've got scalp hunters, and these are sort of the spies that aren't in the upper echelon of spies. They're like the spies that go down and do the dirty work. They're the ones that have to sneak around in the grungy parts of town and deal with the hookers and deal with the drug dealers and get themselves into real trouble. And Tom Hardy, by the way, in the movie, plays one of these scalp hunters, and he's great at it. Just wonderful. It's so good. Now, kind of the setup of the plot is Jim Preto has been given this mission to suss out who is the mole in the British Secret Service. But the way that the story is told and how often it jumps back and forth in time, and it does in both the movie and the miniseries and the book, the time jumps in the back and forth are brilliantly laid out, that we don't know if Jim Preto is alive or assassinated. We kind of know, but we don't know. I mean, it's kind of given to us, but it's not. Like I said, you gotta figure this stuff out yourself. It's not easy. And then George Smiley is our main character, and he's working with gosh, who is the name of that guy? Gwillem. Gwillem, played brilliantly by Benedict Cumberbatch in the movie. Gwillem and George Smiley are kind of working together as double secret agents, if that makes sense. So they're being kind of investigated as maybe they're the mole, but they're kind of even more up in the they're more in the know, and they're kind of investigating the investigators of the mole. It's just so convoluted. And like I said, I love the fact that John Le Carre put this massive double agent, who's screwing who's doing what, into this whole thing. And then hanging above all of it is Carla, the Moscow, the baddie from Moscow, codenamed Carla, is their badass assassin slash spy in Moscow. And it's just all of it. He's hanging over the top of all of it. And there are scenes of just everyday spycraft where they're just like kind of, you got to listen to this phone, and when it rings and somebody says a code word, you got to write it down, and there's dudes, and then the dudes will fall asleep, and they'll miss the phone call, which will screw up the whole thing. I mean, it's crazy how much humanity he puts in this, of people just, they're spies for major countries, and yet they're so fallible. They're so like, they can be so easily just like up their job out of sheer apathy and laziness and complacency kind of thing. And yet some of the others, like George Smiley, are so dedicated to the truth and making sure things get to the truth. And when him and his friend Gwillem, I mean, they just seem to be a step ahead of everybody else. And just each one of these characters, Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Poor Man, Beggar Man, Alaline, Roy Bland, Esterhaus, Hayden, George Smiley, all of them, Control included, and everybody else they come across in this book. It just, I love everything about it. It's just, I think if you watch my top 100 favorite novels of all time, I know this finished probably in the top 20. I know I think in my favorite thrillers of all time, it might be number 2 or 3. But after reading it again and watching these shows again, I'm like, almost like, God, it might be top 10 favorite book of all time at this point. Just one of the stories that I keep coming back to about every 4 or 5 years, reading the book, rewatching all this stuff, and just falling in love with John Le Carre over again. And then I just go on a John Le Carre reading binge for a while. And that's what's going to happen, because I'm already reading the next book about a lot of the same characters. And do we find them all? Do we find them all? Do we find out if Jim Preto was really assassinated or not? What goes on? Is George Smiley, there's our main character, the mole? What happens to him? I mean, all of these characters, some of them have triumphs, some of them have huge falls from grace, and it's heartbreaking in a lot of ways. The entanglements they get into just amongst themselves, just their wives and their families, all of this involved. I mean, I can't tell you how this book is like 450 pages. How long is it? 374 pages, and it packs into it so many ideas and so many plot lines and so many things going on. It's just absolute literary brilliance. 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10 for the movie. 10 out of 10 for the miniseries.